We want to welcome everybody to the annual National Conference of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. This is an extremely important conference that we are holding on today and tomorrow, the theme of which is from Trayvon Martin to Stop and Frisk, from COINTELPRO to Black misleadership. And the theme of the conference and what's going to be dealt with over the next couple of days is evident in the theme itself. We do want to acknowledge the fact that not only are we joined by comrades of the coalition and of the community here in Harlem, New York City, but we are also being viewed on live stream on ubuntunews.com and on impdum.org and perhaps other sites controlled by Black is Back members and supporters. So we have a lot of ground to cover again over the rest of today as well as tomorrow. We're going to go ahead and get into it. I do want to say that for those who are not familiar with the Black is Back Coalition, we are an organization of various different organizations that have come together with a common understanding of what we view the problem African people are faced with being, and that is, of course, the fact that we have been denied the right to be a self-determined people. We also a coalition that's founded upon the principles or anti-imperialist principles, recognizing that we know the fundamental problem facing Africans is not racism as such or any other idea in the minds of any individual walking around today. But the real problem that we are confronted with as African people is the fact that a foreign and hostile power in the form of imperialism has control over our lives, our economy, our government, and everything else that affects us. We come together as a coalition not only to engage in discussion on how we can, how these problems manifest themselves, but we also come together to engage in discussion on how we can get organized to change and ultimately transform this situation, to overturn imperialism. So that is these are the guiding principles, and there are many others, but these are the fundamental principles that the Black is Back Coalition comes together around. And we've held numerous actions over the last 4 or 5 years of our existence. We hold yearly marches and militant protests at the White House to publicly oppose the neo-colonial President Barack Obama and the war of aggression he's waging against oppressed peoples, including Africans ourselves. We've marched in defense of our brothers and sisters of Haiti. We traveled down to Miami, Florida, to organize a powerful mobilization in defense of Haiti. We've organized in Philadelphia a national conference similar to this one, through which we exposed the war being waged against African people there and around the world. And we've held numerous other conferences designed to bring more people into the coalition and to develop a greater capacity to resist and to win freedom and self-determination for our people. So on this conference, we're going to be approaching various questions, including some fundamental changes that we want to undergo within our infrastructure as well as the bylaws. A lot of other internal business is going to be handled on day 2 or tomorrow. On today, the next few workshops are going to focus primarily on this question of state repression. The repression that comes down on the African community and the movement for our liberation at the hands of the U.S. police, courts, prisons, and other apparatuses of the U.S. colonial and imperialist state. And we're going to get a concrete understanding of what that really means for African people here in Harlem and throughout the world, throughout all of the discussion that we're going to be having for the rest of today. So I just wanted to offer that up. My name is Diop. I'm the chair of the Political Action Working Group for the coalition. And on the first panel, we are here with the chairman of the Black is Back Coalition, also the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. We'll be hearing a main political overview of the conference itself, including the question of the state as an instrument of repression. And at this time, I would like for everybody to please welcome Chairman of the Black is Back Coalition, Chairman Omali Yeshitela-Chair.
Good brothers and sisters, as you can see on the agenda that we passed out, I'm supposed to address the question of state repression and the struggle for political space, me and Vice Chair Glen Ford, who just walked in. And I want to spend some time addressing that. It's clear that we have a lot of problems, contradictions as a people in this country, and the fact is we have problems as a people, all around the world. But before getting to that topic, what I would like to do is just say a little more about the Black is Back Coalition that Comrade Diop was speaking of a moment ago. As he also said, I'm the chair of the African People's Socialist Party, which is an organization with a definite philosophy, ideology. We stand for definite things. But the fact is that the majority of the people in this country and the majority of Africans are not part of the African People's Socialist Party and don't necessarily share our views. The fact is, whether they share our views or not, we got problems. And we need to find a way that we can get together, despite the different views that we have, to start taking on some of these problems. And this is one of the things that helped us to understand the need to try and pull together the Black is Back Coalition. We call it Black is Back because our movements and organizations over the years, especially since the 1960s, had been literally destroyed. And what was calling itself representation for our community was often people who were working with the very same forces who were responsible for our problems. Or when we have a problem, they would see the rage and how our people were upset, and then they'd misdirect our people into ways that wouldn't contribute to solving the problem, but would just wear us out with prayer missions and marching and praying and that kind of thing. So, and then there was the presidency of Barack Hussein Obama, who, when he came, it was like somebody had put something in the water. Our community just was absolutely ecstatic. This was like a savior had come, and somehow this man was going to be able to rescue us. And even though he ran a campaign, a candidacy, and was being put forward by all of the media here and around the world as evidence that there was no longer any so-called racial problem in this country. And he promoted that. He actually said 90-some-odd% of the so-called racial issues in this country had been solved. This is the man, when he was running for president in Harlem, and the first so-called presidential debate came out in opposition to reparations to our people, saying something silly like he didn't want to acknowledge the historical wrong, people with historical wrongs, because somehow that was going to bring about some kind of division. And then right after he said that, he ran down to Miami and got on his belly, calling before a Jewish population who claimed to be historically wrong, and offered everything, gave them Jerusalem, like it was his to give away. So, I mean, these were some of the things we were confronted with. So we said there was this assumption that somehow that the black community had gone, that the struggle that had really changed so much of the world and so much in this country of our people until Malcolm was killed and until King was killed, until members of the Black Panther Party were murdered. The Panther 21 happened right here. Suddenly we have believed that Obama, Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, stuff like that represents the future of our folk. So we've had to make a really pronounced statement that that was not the case. And guess what? Black is back. So that was what we came forward with this coalition. We also recognize, and particularly at this time, with the grotesque brutality of war that this government was spreading throughout, and particularly in the Middle East, and then the so-called peace movement that our community never really participated in as a community. Although all the polls said, even before the war, that more than 70%, almost 80% of our people were opposed to the war, and more than 70% of the white community was for the war. When it came down to the so-called anti-war and peace movement, it was white-led movements, and you didn't see no black people hardly in those things. So what's going on here? And one of the things that was going on is what they call peace, and what we call peace is something absolutely different. Because what they called peace was sort of a stop in place. What they were characterizing as peace wasn't necessarily something that had anything to do with us. Because the same people who were prepared to lay down in front of a tank to keep it from rolling out, going to El Salvador or going to some other place where the U.S. was engaged in war, would sit silently while police precincts were sending cars into our communities responsible for the Amadou Diallos, responsible for the Sean Bells, responsible for all the violence that's being committed against our community. So we said being for peace is not enough. It's not good enough. You got to be for social justice. Because Bush was for peace. And if it was a peace on the plantation, the slave master is for peace. The slave master just don't want the slaves to be rising up. So we didn't want peace on the plantation. We didn't want imperialist peace. We said there cannot be peace without social justice. And so what we believe is that it's absolutely necessary to recognize that peace can only come through justice. That the peace that we look for requires us to stand on the side of the oppressed. So it's not just peace in Afghanistan, but victory to the Afghan people in their struggle against this. It's not just peace in Iraq, but victory to the Iraqi and all the other oppressed peoples around the world. We believe that that's the kind of statement that has to be made, and then we also believe that there must be recognition of a war that's going on that nobody ever talks about. It's a war that's resulted in so-called in concentration camps that people recognize as Indian reservations. I mean, this land, nobody even talks about the Indians if they ain't in the room. But this is the country that's been robbed them of. They're living in concentration camps with a lifespan only in their 40s. It's a war that's being committed against our community. That's why in a country with more than 2 million people in prison, at least half of them, or almost half of them, are Africans. And then when you look at Africans, Mexicans, and Indians and things like that, we make over half the people in the damn prison system. Like, that's a war that nobody gets talked about. They act like it's normal. That's the way it ought to be. When we only occupy, according to them, 12–13% of the population. Yet we grossly outnumber everybody in the prison system. Or when you look at a situation where we came here, we didn't come here looking for a better way of life. We're the only people who lost a better way of life as a consequence of coming here. And then you look at our situation, and after working for free for a couple of 100 years, we broke. That doesn't make any sense. As hard as we work, we don't. You look at the statistics, what we see is that white wealth in this country is 22 times greater than the wealth of black people. That's absolutely illogical, except for the kind of system that has come as a consequence of enslaving us, taking the land away from the Indian people, stealing half of Mexico. And then you look around, those of us who have had these experiences are the ones who have less to show for being on this earth. So we want to have a different kind of movement. And that's why we got together. And during this time, when we came together, especially since this war against Arabs and Muslims was so outstanding, when we first called for our meetings, we had a lot of different organizations that came out. Muslims came out, people who were motivated. They were Christians, but they were motivated because their religion taught them that they were supposed to be against injustices. They came out. People who call themselves Pan-Africanists came out. People who call themselves nationalists and communists and different kinds of groups came out and participated. And initially, there were quite a few people in this coalition. But a lot of them didn't have staying power, truthfully. And because either because the policy seemed to change, either because the government worked real hard to create what they call good Muslims. Do you remember that, don't you? They were looking for good Muslims. Muslims who were opposed to the struggles that most of the Arab and Muslim people were engaged in around the world. Perhaps that has something to do with it. Perhaps it was errors of our own that had something to do with it. I can't overlook that possibility. But the point is that, that the numbers of organizations and people who were willing to get engaged in this struggle at the beginning diminished. But they didn't diminish right away. We've had magnificent impact on what is called a peace movement in this country today. People cannot talk about peace and war in the same way they could before the advent of the Black is Black coalition. We were the first to organize a demonstration against the Obama regime. The first national organization against Obama happened under the Black is Black coalition did that right at the White House and what have you. We were the first to respond to what was happening in Haiti. When we say what's happening in Haiti, because it was clear that there was an earthquake, devastation, a lot of people dead, then you had everybody willing to speak sympathetically and offer charity for Haiti. But what Haiti needed was not charity. Haiti just needed justice. And when I say justice, we were the organization that recognized that Haiti had the first workers' revolution in the world. What happened to all those people who were supposedly involved in struggling for the rights of workers in this country? Haiti had the first workers' revolution in the world. Haiti had the first and perhaps only successful slave rebellion in the world. And then after doing that, Haiti created a situation where it said, any slave on earth who gets to Haiti, you free. And people did go to Haiti. And Haiti was a fundamental problem for the whole white nationalist social system, because at that time the whole economy was organized around what? Slavery. And now you got this black republic that's telling everybody who's a slave, come here, you can be free. And so what you saw was France, the United States, the whole European world organizing the first economic quarantine in this hemisphere was not against Cuba, it was against black people in Haiti. They forced Haiti to pay reparations to Haiti. That Haiti was giving them money for almost 100 years. Haiti was paying them back. You know what Haiti was paying France for? For its lost property. You know what its lost property was? Us. And Haiti has been constantly under attack. And so when we said, after the hurricane, we said you got to do more than just send some care packages to Haiti. You got to also stand up to demand reparations to Haiti. Reparations from France that took all those resources, reparations from the United States that invaded Haiti, stayed there, and then after they left, they took all the gold out of the treasury of Haiti and they brought it back here to New York. Just as an object, and they say, you know, they had Haiti as evidence that black people who are free can't take care of ourselves. When this has been under assault all this time. And this is how the coalition approached the question of Haiti. Because we're tired of people treating us like we're some kind of charity case who can't deal for ourselves. We're tired of people treating us like somehow something wrong with us, that this pathology that they say exists in our community, when we're dealing with a social system that was built as a part of the way it was built through putting us in slavery and keeping us in slavery. So the Black is Black coalition was just really fundamentally important. And we did magnificent mobilization just last year in Newark. In fact, August 18th of last year, we had our conference in Newark. It was how do you call it? Participated in conference. We had people, well-attended conference, people from various places throughout the country, and then, of course, right there in Newark itself. And Newark has its own history. Like every city in this country that's got a black community in it, you better believe it's got a history of resistance and struggle. And so in Newark, we had a great turnout there at that conference, and this is one of the succeeding conferences. This conference we're having on today. And again, part of the issue is a lot of the forces that were with us before, Muslims either seem not to be as concerned, or they might be in some of the concentration camps that they got about, or scared out of action and what have you. But there are others who claim to be, there's some who wouldn't be with us because they were supporters of Obama. I call one leader out of New York, one Negro leader here in New York, militant, got a militant reputation here, and I called him up and tell him that we were organizing the coalition. He literally cussed me out. And he did it, I knew why he did it, because he was an Obama supporter. And so there were others who couldn't stand up for the community because they stood instead for Obama. So the coalition is important. We've always believed it to be important. We've always struggled to try to have groups from our community to come into the coalition so that we can have a representative organization. An organization representing the diversity of our community. And it is a diverse community. Even though we got different kinds of philosophers in that community, we can't act like ours is the only one in the community. Therefore, everybody's got to think like we think for us to get together and do some work. You got to think like I think to be in the African People's Socialist Party, but you don't have to think like I think to be in the Black is Black coalition. And so that's the struggle that we've been involved in. And I'm putting this before you because I think it's important for everybody here to be aware somewhat of the context of the creation of the organization, some of the things that we're trying to do with the coalition, and clearly the need for us to win more organizational participation into this organization. Now, we're having this discussion. Even as we're having this discussion, there are thousands of people right now. We're talking about Trayvon Martin. We're talking about counterintelligence program that was organized, that resulted in the assassinations of people like Martin Luther King. In 1968 alone, more than 30 members of the Black Panther Party were killed throughout this country. And more than 300 were thrown in prison from around this country. So there was an ongoing war, ongoing aggression against us. So we're talking about being opposed to counterintelligence program. We're also talking about being opposed to black misleadership because we've been too quiet, and there have been forces out there who we respected, and we have a real problem saying that they have betrayed us, because somehow to say it, let this come out of our mouth, is somehow to recognize that we are not as united as we need to be. And of course, we really have a deep sense of a need for unity, given the kind of attack that comes down against us as a people. But we also have to ask the question all the time of united for what? United for what end? Just unity for unity's sake doesn't work. As an oppressed people, we have to be united to win our freedom. And so we're talking about dealing with the question of misleadership because we have to call it out. And I just want to say, even as we're having this discussion, that the reality is that this government is murdering, is responsible, has funded, is U.S. bullets, U.S. trained armies, U.S. funded apparatus that's killing thousands of people in the streets and in the worship places, centers of worship in Egypt at this moment. Right now that's happening. And sometimes we may make a mistake and think that because it's happening there, it has nothing to do with us, but it has everything to do with us. Because it is a part of a process that this country, this government, and the whole social system of the world, of the white power, is engaged in now to protect the status quo. Because people are tired of being stepped on. People are tired of being oppressed. And so in Egypt, they thought they had a fix. They thought they had regained control over that situation. They give that military in Egypt $1.5 billion a year to the military, not to the Egyptian people. Who have you ever seen the military of Egypt fight since 19 what? What was it, when 60-something with the 73? 73. They don't fight anybody. Since 1979 is when they started giving them all this money. What happened in 1979? Is they got them to agree to collaborate with the white nationalist illegitimate settler state of Israel, where white people left Miami and left Milwaukee, the Golden Mayor, from Milwaukee and places like that, and said that, and went and stole these people's land, said God gave it to them 2,000 years ago, and so they went and stole this land and scratched the name off from Palestine and called it Israel, said they're Israelis. Well, before they resurrected a dead language that nobody even spoke anymore, right? And then called themselves Israelis. And so what are they there for? The U.S. was one of the first to protect it. What they're there for is that they were late imperialists. And the whole white world has built itself, all this wealth, off of empire, off of attacking and taking resources from various other peoples around the world. this group was just late at it. And they played a really important role. They became a military outpost for the United States government to protect what they see as their interests in the Middle East, all that oil and what have you there. So they're the white people, the white cops on the block in the Middle East to protect the oil for white power, etc. And so then you've got Egypt, and all of the Arabs have been fighting against them for ages until now. You have Egypt, which is the largest country there, and it now unites with Israel, sometimes secretly, sometimes openly, when you had them signing peace deals with James Earl Carter, who was then the president, etc. So the Egyptian military has been getting $1.5 billion a year from this country, and it's been funded for the purpose of suppressing the people of Egypt for selling out the people in the Middle East in order to keep the so-called Suez Canal open so the U.S. can continue to send those warships through there to deal with any front that they have to deal with and as a stabilizing force for white power in the area. That's what they're there for. And to maintain the status quo of the world as organized, the way it's organized, so that black people, brown people, other oppressed people around the world will be staying out of place. And Obama is now the face of that. And so what they're doing is they're trying to make it look like a religious question. So these are Muslims and jihadists, and they are jihadists, and they are, some of them, and they are Muslim, but right now all you got to do is be a Muslim, right? And to justify an attack. And it's a sort of disguised a war of aggression that's happening under a religious banner. And so they make you prejudiced against Muslims, etc. And then they say, well, the people they're killing Islamic extremists, Muslim extremists, and they even call them terrorists. But the people won an election. That's how they went to power. They won an election. And Obama's army did a coup and overthrew them. And then people had nonviolent sit-ins. They trying to follow Martin Luther King. They weren't even trying to follow the Muslim Malcolm X. They was following the Christian Martin Luther King, having sit-ins. And that military rushed out and shot, just gunning people down, and they're still killing them right now. And what is the U.S. doing? The U.S. can't even condemn it. They're telling both sides. Both sides. That's like you in your house and somebody comes in and breaks into your house with guns to steal everything you got. You fighting against them, and then somebody comes and say, we want both of y'all to chill out. Which is what the United States government has done in this case, and it won't take a stance. So here, the Black is Black Coalition is opposed to all of that. And we know you are opposed to all of that. And what we want you to do is to be able to see the connection between what is happening in Cairo, Egypt, and what is happening in Harlem right now, and what is happening to us in other places in this country and to oppressed people around the world. That's what this coalition is about. And one thing that we really just want to talk about briefly, because I've used all my time just talking about the coalition mostly, but this issue of why do the police do what they do? Why does the police act like? I mean, you ever notice that the police, in our community, the police got the worst eyesight in the world? You ever notice that? They mistake cell phones and car keys for guns all the time. They just shoot you up. Oh, thought the cell phone was a gun. Thought the keys that you had was a gun, etc. And then you have more rogue cops in our community than any place in the world. Well, it wasn't really the police policy. It's just this rogue bad apple in the barrel. That's the kind of stuff we get, and over again. Then we have Negro leaders because we are so upset because they killed a 97-year-old woman because 10-year-old Clifford Glover was murdered right here in New York in the Bronx, if I'm not mistaken, in 1973, shot in the back, 10 years old, weighed 90 pounds, and the cop said he shot him because he was scared that he had a gun. I mean, this is the history of our relationship. And we keep asking the question, why does this kind of stuff happen with us? And then our leaders tell us, well, just let the court system solve it. Just one bad guy. Everything is up. Look how much progress we made. We used to be on a cotton plantation, and now we can get shot down, in the Bronx or in Harlem or something like that. And this is the kind of misleadership that we're talking about. Or just pray. right? As long as it's a Christian God that you're praying to. So why does the cop have these kinds of, this thing with us? Why does the cop, why is it that in Afghanistan, for example, they keep accidentally, they bomb funerals, they bomb weddings, they oops, you know, we thought it was some militants. You ever notice that? You've seen that happen. They kill everybody in the wedding. They kill everybody at the funeral. People already dead, and they come and bomb them again. They use drones, murdering people, and every time there's these accidents that they do. They don't have that kind of accident in Germany. They don't accidentally shoot people in France like that, and they don't accidentally kill people in the white community like they're killing us here in this country. They don't accidentally have more than 1 million white people in the prisons. The fact is, it's us. There are more black people in prison in this country than there are people who are in prison in many different countries around the world. So we say that the reason this is the case is because anytime you have any system, any kind of society, where you have a group of people who live at the expense of another group of people, where that society is split between the haves and the have-nots, then you've got to have some kind of organization to keep those who don't have, from taking back that which has been taken from them who have everything, by those who have everything. You've got to have that, and that thing is called a state. The state. I'm not talking about the state of New York, I'm talking about a particular kind of organization that you find in class, in societies that's split by class. And the thing about the state, this state that we're talking about, because states have existed for a long period of time, but the capitalist state is different. Because the capitalist state, that is the capitalist state, the one that Obama and George Bush both represented, the one that Hollande in France represents, the capitalist state, the one that NATO protects, as well as the U.S. Army here, that state was born as a consequence of slavery and colonialism, taking people's lands, countries, and freedoms away from them. So it has a particular character. From its inception, from its birth, it was born for the purpose of suppressing black people, brown people, and yellow people around the world. Because when you look at the economic configuration of the world, when you look at the fact that you're talking about a world where 50% of the people in this world, can you imagine? 50% of people in this world live or try to exist off less than $3 US a day. 50% of the people, how many people? Almost 7 billion people on Earth? 50% of them. When you look at, look even further, then you find that 80% of the people on the Earth try to survive off $10 or less a day. And in Africa, people are lucky if they get $1 a day. Even though, when you look at all the places where people are suffering and poor, that's where all the wealth that this country in Europe comes from. Doesn't make any sense. Africa, as rich as it is in terms of natural and material resources, should be the poorest place on the planet. Doesn't make any sense at all. Except if it was changed, then that means that the U.S. corporations here wouldn't be able to get it. People talk about Steve Jobs. How many people here know who Steve Jobs was? He's the man who created Apple. They say he's a genius. He was so innovative, so bright, so smart, so all of this. But Steve Jobs was able to do that because of a mineral called coltan. You know how many people here know what coltan is? It's a mineral that's necessary, almost necessary for a computer. Any computer, any cell phone that you got requires coltan. 87% of the coltan in the world comes from a place called Congo. In Congo, since 1998, they've estimated from 5 to 7 million black people have been killed through proxy wars to get that and other resources. So this is the kind of world that in relationship that they are protecting. And guess what? The military, the armies, and police, they do everything they can to protect this relationship. So it's not that this guy's a bad apple in the bunch. The whole bunch is bad. The whole system is bad. The whole damn orchard, is that what you call, how do you say that word, orchard? Orchard is bad. And this is the problem that you and I have. So people keep having us searching through this barrel, this basket of apples, trying to pick out the rotten ones and separate it from a process where the whole system is bad. So this is what we're up against. When we look at Sean when we look at Sean Bell, when we look at Trayvon Martin, and the other thing I just want to say is that when Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin, stop and frisk operation. And I think it's really important. He just didn't have a uniform, so Trayvon didn't cooperate and agree to be stopped and frisked. But he did have a gun. And because Trayvon didn't cooperate with the stop and frisk, he was able to gun him down. And because of the system itself, the whole state apparatus that includes the courts, the military, the police organizations, the FBI, Holder, all of this, because the system itself is one that functions to protect the status quo. Even after this man had murdered this child, it took 45 days before any charge was ever filed against him. And it was filed against him not because the system saw that it was necessary, but because of you. Because Trayvon Martin's family succeeded in arousing your anger to such an extent that they felt like they had to do something in order to protect the system. And then they took this trial, and remember, when Zimmerman was found innocent, they didn't even raise the question of that Zimmerman killed him because he was black. They didn't have to, because the damn jury felt like it was all right to shoot a young black youngster. If you white, you're supposed to be scared of him anyway, and so he was able to walk. So it's a state that we're talking about. It's a particular kind of relationship, and we want people to be awakened to that. And so we want people to understand we're not talking about what religion you pray to, what direction you pray in, or anything like that. It's a system that was founded off of slavery, founded off genocide against oppressed peoples around the world, and is maintained through that very same process. And everybody, almost everywhere, you open a newspaper, the world is in a state of resistance. Everybody's resisting everywhere. And we have a responsibility to take our stance, take our place in the ranks of the oppressed peoples around the world, because there's nobody more oppressed than African people here and around the world. So I want to thank you for coming out. I really appreciate your coming out. And the other thing I want to say, and I'm going to shut it down, is that I recognize, again, that the resistance and legacy of resistance here in Harlem that makes it possible for us to have this event. We'd be silly if we didn't recognize that. That nobody is coming into Harlem as some kind of saviors and what have you. Harlem, has been a beacon of resistance forever. And I know that we couldn't even be here having this discussion without the work that other folk have been doing, whether people agree with everybody or not. You don't have to agree with everybody in Harlem, but everybody who's been involved in this struggle in Harlem, has played such an important role that makes it possible for us to come here and have this meeting on today. So I want to thank you very much, and I want to hope that you can, at least as a consequence of what I've had to say, have a great appreciation for what the Black is Back Coalition is about. And I'm hoping that I've contributed to some kind of understanding of the nature of the state, this organization that's always there, that the police department is a part of, and that by extension, so was Zimmerman when he reached out and killed that child, which is one reason that the state didn't formally want to do anything with him and why he was able to walk away. We're going to have further discussion on this. I'm happy to say that we're in good company and people are going to really help us to understand this question even better. So thank you very much.
We'll thank Chairman Omali Yeshitela for that political overview. And with us, just joined the panel, is Glen Ford, who is the Vice Chair of the Black is Back Coalition Steering Committee and editor of Black Agenda Report. Will be providing a presentation on the questions of Trayvon Martin, Black misleaders, and the struggle for political space. So Glen Ford, the hood.
I'm going to sit down, not because I don't have the stamina of the chairman, but also because that's the only way I can handle my papers. And those of you who know me know I need my papers. It feels like, and I'm saying it feels like we're in the midst of something that some people would call a kind of special period for black folks. Black people are fired up around the country simultaneously behind the Trayvon Martin saga. I mean the whole story. and the fallout from the acquittal of George Zimmerman. In fact, they're fired up so much so that President Obama had to come out of his President of all the people office to tell anecdotes about when he used to be black. Eric Holder had to come out of his Attorney General's office and pretend that he has not been trying to put as many black people in prison as possible for as long as possible for his entire career. The execution of black people by cops and white civilians is an everyday affair in the United States, just as the Malcolm X grassroots movement has documented. It's an ordinary occurrence. It's an everyday thing. It's not extraordinary. What is special about this national outpouring of anger at the killing and at the acquittal and the demand for an answer to the question, what do we do about it, is the way black people are feeling at this moment. So this is a psychological moment. Black activist organizations are expected at moments like these to provide answers to the question, what do we do about it? Answers for the short term and answers in the long term. And the answer, I believe, must begin with putting these racist assaults on black people into a context, an historical context and a sociological, economic, political economy context. So what we have is an extraordinary black response to what is in America an ordinary event, the killing of black people with impunity. When we look at the larger world picture and at the national picture, we see that we are, in fact, objectively speaking, in a very special period in history. The black economy is in collapse. The black-white wealth ratio is now at 20-1. It's never been anything like that. Whole sectors of our people have been marginalized and cut loose entirely from the economy. We are in an unprecedented crisis in terms of our relationship to the American economy and in terms of our very presence in the cities that we live in. That presence is precarious, as everybody in Harlem knows with the gentrification that's going on here. Upward mobility for most of us is an impossibility, and downward mobility is just about guaranteed. It's guaranteed unless something fundamental and transformational happens in this economy and in this system. Yet neither of the two major political parties offers anything in terms of relief. They don't even offer a vague wish list of promises that they won't even keep. They offer nothing. Is new. I'm 63 years old and I'm telling you that is new. Not even a whispered promise of anything. That is new in this country. Essentially, both parties are saying, I ain't got nothing for you. Austerity is all you can look for. It's straight to the horizon, and you've got to tighten your belt. And they're saying, yes, it is true. Wall Street really is too big, and it really is too powerful to be punished for the crimes it commits. Get used to it. That is what is special about this period. It is one like we have never experienced before, because no one has experienced the rise and then decline of the capitalist system. It is true that black people have not made any substantial demands of Barack Obama, and we all know why that is true, so there's no need to get into that. But the economic crisis that faces the United States is a general crisis. It's not just a crisis for black people, although black folks have been hurt most. There was, just a little while ago, for a very brief time, a thing called the Occupy Wall Street movement. And that movement, for that brief period of time, put a spotlight on the banks and blamed them correctly for the crisis. And now everybody hates the banks. But still, the two political parties and that system that they defend does not budge an inch, doesn't even pretend that it's thinking about making any kind of concessions. Those two political parties are intransigent because, well, two reasons. One is that Wall Street really is firmly in charge of the entire political process in the United States. Now, people have said words to that effect before, but now it is absolutely true. There are no cracks in their hegemony. They control the entire dialogue. You can sit there and say the banks are evil and everyone will agree, within the sound of your voice, will agree with you all day. But that does not get into the workings of this political system because they got it locked down. The subordination of the Democratic Party is complete. They own it lock, stock, and barrel. That was not true before. There were other influences in the Democratic Party. There were corners that you could crawl into and get something done for somebody sometimes. That's not true anymore. The bankers own the Democratic Party and the guy who heads it up right now, Barack Obama. And that also means that the Congressional Black Caucus is owned and the entire black electoral political class. They don't make a move without either getting paid by the banksters or else in fear that the banksters are going to put somebody else up with their money and take away their seats. So they do nothing. The political system, the electoral system, because politics is not just elections, but the electoral system is in lockdown, and that is new. That is a special period that we're in. Number two, the capitalist system. At this stage in its decline, I'm not going to say in its development, because that gives people the impression that it's still developing. It's not. It's declining. That capitalist system is dominated entirely by the banks. And it's not that it refuses to ameliorate the pain that it causes. It does not ameliorate the pain that it causes because it cannot ameliorate the pain. That's because the bankers are devouring the public sphere. And the public sphere means essentially the government. That is what austerity is about. Therefore, if you devour the public sphere, if you devour the government, then the government is no longer there to ease the pain. So that is now not a possibility, at least under this system. That means that there will be no war on poverty. There will be no Marshall Plan for the cities. There will only be more gentrification unless we stop this process. That means there won't be any storefront jobs for teenagers or diversions like we used to have in the 60s, all those storefronts keeping people busy. That will not occur because the public sphere is being eaten up by the banks. In other words, there's going to be no Vaseline during this period of special bank hegemony. There are going to be no salves and no potions and no lubricants, just all because, of course, the president's Obama. He didn't bring any Vaseline either. Instead, he just brought himself. And the idea that his very existence was somehow what black folks should be satisfied with. The effect is like a kind of dope that puts us to sleep. Or as Jay-Z would have it, he'd have us believe that, along with himself, Obama is a kind of charity for black people, a gift to us. So instead of getting social justice, we get a black family in the White House, and we're supposed to be happy about that. And in fact, people were happy for about 4 years. Black folks actually imagined for 4 years that they were better off than they had ever been in the history of black people in this country. And a series of surveys were done to see if, well, that could not be true. We know that black people are hurting more than they have been hurting for generations, possibly. Certainly we know that in terms of comparisons with white people, we've never, not since emancipation, been worse off. But those studies confirmed that black people actually did think that somehow we were better off even after the great meltdown and the collapse of our economy, better off than we were before. And of course, that is the dope of Obama. All that black folks wanted from Obama during that period was some words of affection, words of brotherly affection, and some gestures that would say, well, you know, we love you and he loves you back. But all we got was the back of his hand and insults every time the occasion warranted it in his mind, in terms of making white people understand that he thought the same way about us that they do. All of this during this real special period, a catastrophe for black people, and then came the Trayvon Martin murder. And then the year and a half of waiting for the trial, and our minds were on this murder, and for an unprecedentedly long time, we got to focus on this particular, really ordinary incident in the United States, but we got to focus on it for a whole year and a half. And then came the acquittal and all of our great waves of outrage and sadness. And then came the white response. We found that 2/3 of white people believed that the killing of Trayvon Martin was somehow justified. And that told black folks finally where we were at in America after these 4 years of delirium and delusion. They realized that white majorities still believe that this is a white man's country and that blacks have no rights that they need to respect, including the right to life itself. It was a wake-up. That is the special period that we are in psychologically as a result of the Trayvon saga, this common experience that we went through together via the media, basically. All of these other catastrophes have been unfolding for the last 4 years, since 2008 and the great economic collapse. But it took Trayvon to wake us up, but that's where we're at. It took a violent physical assault and a massive miscarriage of justice by the criminal justice system to break us out of our passivity in the age of austerity and the age of Obama. However, that really is historically characteristic of the black response. In modern times has been sparked by the repressive arm of the state, either directly by the cops or by the sanctioning of white violence against black people by the state. Every single one of them dating back to the first of our modern rebellions in 1935, right here in Harlem. That is what gets us going. It gets our juices going politically. That's the way it's been historically. It seems to be the language that all of us immediately understand. That is, we understand immediately in the raw. We don't need to quibble about the nature of that beast. And what our history has told us is that the blatant application of raw racist power is also the possibility, the potential for the start of our most profound deliberations among ourselves. That's when we get serious about the nature of the system. It's what calls forth that question, why do they treat us like this? And then it demands that we figure out what we're going to do about our generalized situation. So black people's intense focus on the criminal justice system demands that the members of the Black is Back Coalition and everybody else struggle to expose, and that's by word and deed, by talking and doing, the true nature of the system. And the true nature of that system is to contain our people through the world's most pervasive mass incarceration system, and to prevent us from exercising any of our self-determinationist rights. That's it, I believe, in a nutshell. We must emphasize, as we attempt to respond to the, not to the Trayvon situation, because it is ordinary, but to black people's excitement, anxiety, and new energy to resist this criminal justice system. We've got to emphasize that racial profiling is not something that happens to individuals. It just appears that way. What happened to Trayvon and Omali and Amadou and Sean and Oscar Grant and all of the other hundreds of people who are extrajudicially executed in the United States today every year is the ordinary and everyday product of a system that profiles all of black folks, that profiles black people as a group. It is not an individualized experience. And if you fall into the trap of examining each case one by one and acting as if it is a discrete injustice, then you don't get the point, and we will not be able to mount a real resistance to this system. Racial profiling, and that means profiling of an entire people, is the justification for hyper-surveillance of black communities. That results in the criminalization of whole sections of our cities, of our neighborhoods. If you look at the various ways that we are profiled and redlined, you will find that in those cities where drug use zones, by they basically include 80–90% of where black people live in those cities. Are these drug designated zones, or are these black people zones? Well, clearly, of course, they're black folk zones. So the whole of the black community is being hyper-surveilled by that supposedly anti-drug mechanism and rationale. It is not, racial profiling is not about some black man driving a car that looks too expensive for him to have. It is about being black, period. That's extremely important because lots of folks, when they claim to oppose racial profiling, are really talking about that black doctor who has the expensive car and who was so unfairly stopped by a white cop who mistakenly did not understand that this black doctor has money. So in these black misleadership class circles, that is the ultimate crime, not respecting the fact that they have earned enough money to drive that Benz. But when you talk about how the police treat brothers and sisters on the street, that's a different story. And you won't find them energizing themselves in defense of brothers and sisters on the street. The real reason is they're not about defending black people as a group, but only their own newfound status. So it is extremely important on a day-to-day basis as we confront racial profiling, not to allow them to individualize this and make them just discrete instances of discriminating against the person. These so-called leaders will tell you that they want to fix stop and frisk. Yeah. If stop and frisk is all about some cops doing to some black people rude and obnoxious and maybe illegal things, then I believe that you can fix it. If that is the problem, you can fix it by putting cameras on the hats of the cops so that people could play back the video. And that, in fact, is what the judge in this federal ruling last week is calling for. That in one precinct in every borough of the city, the cops wear cameras. Well, what is that going to do in terms of racial profiling as it actually exists? What we need is for the police to get up off of us and stop surveilling and profiling us as a people. Those cameras and these other reform measures will not stop the national black surveillance regime. That won't end the armed occupation of our communities, and it certainly won't even make a dent in mass black incarceration. We need the police to be forced to end the cradle to the grave surveillance of our communities that leads directly to black Americans representing 1 out of every 8 prisoners on the entire planet. If you take a microscope and take it to a community looking for crime, then you will find it or you will invent it. And mass incarceration of the members of that community becomes inevitable. And we will wind up with what we have, which is black prison population that is genocidal in scope. So the fight against racial profiling, and that is the surveillance and stigmatizing of a whole people, that's really what profiling is, has to be waged in the context of community control, in the context of black power, and in the context of self-determination. If we wage the fight in that way, then we will confront all of the other crises that are facing that community, because we're talking about that community's right to police itself and to determine its own destiny. And that relates to everything that happens in the community. It is automatic. It is a straight line. We have faced this problem before, and we have had this discussion before, and some of us are old enough to remember it, right, Brother Omali? And that was in the 60s. And in 1966, as a result of this discussion, the Black Panther Party was formed. It began as a kind of cop watch, but it soon developed a critique of all of the aspects of this rotten system. I know that we can learn from the party's mistakes. That is one of the privileges of surviving that period. And we can also learn from their fantastic successes. But we need to seize the time. Power to the people.